So all details of that, of course, are available at journalismunderfire.org. I could speak about that conference for the next 3 hours, but I'm not going to. And instead, we are going to talk all about the Sahel today. So our speaker today needs very little introduction, but I'll introduce her anyway. Vicki Huddleston, of course, was a U.S. ambassador, and she led U.S. diplomatic missions in Cuba, in Mali, in Ethiopia, and Madagascar, and knows quite a bit about the African continent, which we'll be talking about today. So good morning, Vicki. How are you?
Hey, Sandy, let's get these slides up. And hello, everybody. I'm delighted you have joined today to talk about the Sahel, an area that's sort of the canary in the climate change box, because Africa is going to suffer the most of any continent from climate change. And right now it's happening in the Sahel, and you'll see what else is happening. So here I go. Give me a minute to get up these slides that Sandy and I promised. By the way, this is the tables are turned this morning because Sandy is questioning me instead of me questioning one of our guests. Okay. So I have to go over here and up here. Yeah, I told you, Sandy, I was not fast.
No worries. We'll get there. Aha.
There, yeah. And now we're going to put the slideshow on for you. Okay.
Marvelous.
How about that with the bubbles? Maybe that symbolizes the fact that there's not much water there.
Well,
Okay.
Vicki, let me ask you the obvious first question. What is the Sahel, and what countries are made up? What countries comprise the Sahel?
Right. So there it is. It's about 3,600 miles from the Red Sea to the Atlantic Ocean. It's about 200 miles wide there in Mauritania, Senegal, and, you know, in its widest part, which looks like Sudan, it's about 600 miles wide. It has 1.8 billion trees, according to a recent survey, which I'm not sure I believe, but hey, that's what the survey says. It's this in-between zone between the Sahara Desert and the savanna of Africa. And in the rainy season, you have lovely places like this that are quite green and lush, and where crops can grow. And then if you go a little north, just over the border, you'll be in the desert. And this is what a Saharan desert town looks like, probably in the rainy season, because you see some green trees. And this photo is Chad, and it's a Nadi Plateau, and it's the borderline between the Sahara and the Sahel. And the borderline is quickly disappearing as the Hamatan, that's these big sandstorms that actually sometimes reach New Mexico, come off the Sahara and into the surrounding Sahel. And this is Niamey, the capital of Niger, suffering one of these big sandstorms. So what we're going to focus on this morning is not all of West Africa and not all of the Sahel, because as we said, it goes from the Red Sea to the Atlantic. We're going to focus on the 5 countries most impacted by climate change and terrorism. That's Mauritania, this one here, Mali, this one here, Burkina Faso, this littler one, and then Niger, and then Chad, which is actually part of Central Africa, but all are former colonies of France.
So how much impact, Vicki, has climate change had on the Sahel?
Well, successive droughts. Just, you know, the 2 times that I was in Mali, First time 83, and then the next time 95. Both times there were droughts, but especially in 83. And these droughts run all across from Eritrea, Ethiopia, across Sudan, and all the countries I just mentioned to you. What I love this map because look at New Mexico. New Mexico and the Sahel have a lot in common. This is Lake Chad, which is actually, Chad's a little different from the other countries, and this actually is in the Sahara, but it's kind of considered Sahel because it was this huge lake. Well, as you see, this huge lake, which really was green and blue and wonderful in 1973, in 2001 is pretty dry, and let me assure you, it's drier now. Now, I'm going to take a minute, if I might, and talk about these 5 countries. Okay, I know I'm only showing 4, but I couldn't find a topographic map of Mauritania. Anyway, Mauritania looks like this. This is actually Niger, but it has no green parts. It's just Sahara Desert. So this is Niger. It has, not much in the way of green parts. It consistently is rated as 187th of 188 countries in the United Nations Human Development Index. Okay, so that gives you an idea of what we're dealing with. And by the way, it has a birth rate of 7%, and it's already 22 million people in a country that's mainly now desert. That's the size of California. Not good. And then you have over here in the middle Chad, and that's Lake Chad up in the Sahara. And then you have down below a more savanna Sahelian part. It's one of the poorest and most corrupt countries in the world, with its 13 million people. And the thing about Chad is that they have oil. And I remember very well working with the World Bank to sign an agreement for development with private companies, with Chad, so that the Chadian leaders couldn't get a hold of it. And 60% of it would go into development. Well, they broke after the oil was developed, they broke the deal. And at the very far end is Mali, as you see, the green part Sahelian, and then the northern part Saharan. Mali's fertility rate is 6.4. When I was in Mali, the last time 95, its population was 11 million. It's now 22 million, and its average income is $1,500 a year. Mauritania, which this is Burkina Faso over on the left, and it's mainly a Sahelian. So Burkina Faso has a little bit more opportunity than the other countries, and then Mauritania, which actually has less ethnic problems, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Still extremely poor, but mainly its majority population is one ethnic group, which is more. So what I want you to take away from this is, there we are. What I want you to take away from this is that these are extremely poor countries, the poorest in the world, faced by huge problems of desertification and climate change.
And so it's, as I understand it, there's a big divide between the Semitic and Cushitic races of the north and the Bantu races of the south. And that, just like the climates meet, that in the Sahel is where these two population groups meet. How true is that, or can you explain that in more detail?
Yeah, and in fact, I love this little photograph that I probably found on Wikipedia, but it's a 1905 photograph, and I really think it does a great uh, job of depicting above the Bantu Neo-Sahelian races of sub-Saharan Africa, and below the Semitic or Cushitic races of the north. So that gives you sort of an idea of where these problems begin. As I mentioned earlier, Mauritania is Arab, actually more, and Chad is majority more. So that makes them a bit different from the other countries. So let's start with them. The Berbers first inhabited this area, which is Morocco, Spanish Sahara down through Mauritania and over to Mali. By the 12th century and the Almohad dynasty, the Berbers had become, excuse me, Islamicized and Arabs and and the Arabization had taken place. So now people call them Moors, they call them Berber Arabs. Uh, they're kind of mixed, but they're still part of the Semitic races of the north. Interestingly enough, the word Berber comes from outsider, which was barbary, and that came from barbarian. But the Berbers considered themselves free men, not and that tradition has carried over today because they're out in the desert, men and women, with and still nomadic. And here's another picture of them, which gives you an idea also of the different colors within that ethnic group. Now, the largest confederation of Berbers are Tuaregs. And this is where the Tuaregs are mainly grouped, and that's Mali, Niger, and Algeria, and a little bit in Burkina Faso. And it's the Tuaregs which began actually, and we'll talk about this in a minute, the rebellion, successive rebellions against the Malian government, which is led by sub-Saharan Africans. So this is the Tinarian music group.
Yes.
Thank you, Sandy. Yeah.
They've been here to New Mexico.
Did they come?
Yeah, I saw them here in Taos.
Wow. They're just amazing. And they're up there in the desert. There used to be a festival of the desert up above Timbuktu, and they would sing in that. They still perform in the United States. They've had some trouble with groups, thinking, oh, well, those people must be terrorists. They're not. That's a good picture of them. I hope you can see this man over here on the right, and that he's not covered up by my picture or Sandy's. Anyway, that's Abu. He worked for me. He's an Imran Tuareg. And this is one of the chiefs in Timbuktu. And this is a interpreter I used. And just to kind of throw you off a little bit, this is my son. But it kind of gives you an idea of what the ethnic groups look like. Although this Tuareg doesn't look like the ones you just saw there. And I love this. This is a group of Tuareg children out in the desert. And these are a group of Bellas who are the former slaves of the Tuaregs. And as you can see, they are Bantu, and they are from the south. But there's also a lot of intermarriage between the Bellas and the Tuaregs. And this region then is where you see a real collision of the northern groups, Tuaregs in this case, with the southern Bantu groups.
So many people blame, the problems of the Sahel on the Tuaregs. Is that true? Is that your opinion?
Yeah, no, it's not my opinion, because I think it's a problem of both sides. You know, you had the same problem, only it's reversed in Sudan, and eventually we got South Sudan. It split the country in two because the north was the Semitic Arabs, and the south was the Bantu sub-Saharan African, and they couldn't live together. The rulers in Sudan's case, who were Arabs, didn't treat the Africans well. And so this is the reverse situation. The Tuaregs are a minority, 10% of the population. The people in control are from the south, they're Bantu, and the Tuaregs don't want to be ruled by sub-Saharan African. Now, this will give you a better idea of this ethnic issue. So as you see here, and even going up into Chad, you have the Nilo-Saharan Bantu groups, and then you have the yellow, which are the Tuaregs, the Arabs, the Moors, the northern groups, so to speak. And just to give you a little picture of these people, these are the Fulani. And we're going to talk quite a bit about the Fulani today because they have grievances just like the Tuaregs. And it seems as if in in Mali, both Tuaregs, who are pastoralists, not so much herders, but they are nomads and live with herds of cattle, camels, not cattle, where the Fulanis herd their cattle. And they're both marginalized. And so the Fulani sub-Saharan group, Bantu, is marginalized because they're pastoralized and a minority, and so too are the Tuaregs. This is another picture of Fulani men and Fulani women at a ceremony. And this little girl is from a minority group, the Bozos, who are fishermen and live along the river. And these kids are in a town along the river where we provided a pump and helped them with a huge irrigation project. And I would say they're both from Nilo-Saharan Bantu groups, to include Somrai. And Somrai was the great empire. And I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. And then here further south, and the reason we're including this fuzzy picture with me and my son of the Dogons, because where we're having a problem now in Mali is between the Dogons and the Fulanis. The Dogons, who actually came from someplace in Central Africa and have these wonderful ceremonies, as you can see, and they're sedentary people, and the Fulanis are pushing down into their territory. And I particularly like this picture because this is a Dogon hunter. And, this military guy there thinks he's causing problems and he's telling him to leave. So this is setting us up for a little bit later in where these intercommunal violence is beginning to take place. And a deeper well, here's the Samurai Empire, where actually people did get along. So it's not that it can't be done. It can be done. The Samurai Empire, the rulers were mainly Bantu, sub-Saharan Africa, but it certainly did include the Tuaregs and to some extent the Moors or the Berbers. I think ethnicity is a huge problem. There's no doubt about it. But the bigger problem, I think, is food security and poverty. As I mentioned, these are terribly poor states. Look at that. You know, these are all countries with huge food insecurity and rapidly growing population facing desertification. Where are you going to put these people as they all move south and there's no more room for them?
So, Vicki, I understand you were in Mali when a remnant of the Algerian Islamic Army brought hostages into the Malian Sahara, and that you traveled a lot in the north. Can you tell us what happened?
Oh, yes, so I always like to do this because I just happened to be there when it all began as ambassador to Mali, and little did I know that this situation up north, which was not good, was going to turn into what you see on the screen, which is an insurgency and a jihad with little end in sight. So let me begin with my elephants. I probably didn't need to conclude the elephants, but I find it hard not to include the elephants. When I got to Mali, I learned that there were these spectacular elephants up north and that they were considered really unusual. They make a 400-mile trek from below Timbuktu down to Burkina Faso. They go to Burkina Faso in the south because of the rainy season in the north. You say, I didn't even know it rained, but there are these lakes that appear spontaneously and they grow and sand becomes wet. And then if the little elephants, the baby elephants, step on it, they get sucked into the sand. So they move north. And this was the reserve. And no one was taking care of it. So the French ambassador and I decided that we'd see what we could do. This gives you an idea of these elephants. They're bigger than most. and they don't have any tusks, which is the reason they're still alive. And this one is still alive. But he's taking a little rest. Anyway, on my journeys up there, I was surprised to see that bin Laden seemed to have gained some adherents. Now, I doubt that these women are adherents. Somebody gave them a shirt. In fact, once I was at a checkpoint on the road, there was a kid with a bin Laden t-shirt. So I got a t-shirt of mine out of my luggage and swapped him for his t-shirt. But these guys here who have bin Laden's picture on their door, they're traitors. And they're traitors with Saudi Arabia. And that's how bin Laden and Al-Qaeda moved down into the Sahara, was through trade with the Wahhabis and with Saudi Arabia. Now what then happened shortly after I arrived in Mali is that the GSPC, Group for Salafist and Prayer, which was a remnant of the Algerian Islamic Army that had been defeated, captured 30 hostages in Algeria and brought 15 into the Malian Sahara. And I worked with the Germans and tried to persuade them not to pay ransom, but they did. And they got the hostages released. But the problem is the GSPC continued, as did its successor, to take hostages. So I decided that the most interesting thing I could do in Mali was to go up and try to learn about what was going on. So this is the Imam of Timbuktu. Imam is Sufi, and he's the Imam of the Gingeré Ba Mosque, the biggest one, which was a center of learning in the 13th and 14th century. And I'm finding out from him what's going on up there, and he's annoyed because he's telling me, look, you have all these Wahhabis coming down, converting these young men who don't have any money, taking them to Saudi Arabia and training them in the Wahhabi faith. And we, as you know, are Sufi Muslims, and we don't believe in these jihad We believe in our saints. Timbuktu is the area of 333 saints. So I decided it would be interesting to go up into the desert above Timbuktu, where the GSPC with Al-Para, an Algerian, the Fox, was operating. So I get the Malian military and pay for their gas so that they could show their presence, and then off we'd go. Sometimes we didn't get very far. Here is along the way. I just look at this and I go, oh, it was really hot. Our dumps of GSPC oil, leaving behind these canisters of oil so they can pick them up as they're moving through the desert. And then stopping in one town in Bur, these are all manuscripts. We're just deteriorating away. And this Imam was very conservative. He didn't want me to touch any of them because I was a woman. And then this was one of our most successful projects. This is the town of Arawan up in the desert. And I'm talking to these people about whether they've seen the GSPC. This is our interpreter in the middle, who's an Arab, because these people actually are more than Tuareg. He's a Moor. And they're telling me that no, they really haven't seen the GSPC. And when I question that, they say, well, we are the masters of the desert, and you'll never control the desert unless you work with us, which obviously is very true. So we would have local leaders from Timbuktu with us, and we would talk to them about their needs. So this is what Erawan looks like. Used to be quite a prosperous town. It's just filled up with sand now. And the caravans go through there. And the camels pollute the wells. So we sunk a forage for them so that they would have clean water. We also were providing with defense attaché money. This is our defense attaché with the gun. And our motley group, the military, the local leaders, you get the plan. Up there saying, how can we help? What can we do? Trying to keep these people essentially on our side. So we were repairing clinics, schools, etc. And then we would deal with also the local police, our defense attaché in local garb, and the police. So we actually were pretty successful. We worked with ambassadors across the region, with the French and the US military, which provided equipment, training, and intelligence, and helped the militaries of Mali, Niger, and Chad actually defeat the group for Solifast and Prayer, and Al-Para, the Fox, the Algerian, went to jail. He's in jail in Algeria today. So this was successful, but.
So, I mean, this is a great overview of your time up there, but is the problem much worse or more aggravated today?
Absolutely. Good question, Sandy, because it's very aggravated today. So Mali, Mauritania, and Chad provide troops and don't have as many attacks as the other countries, but Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have continual attacks, and now, despite huge military presence, they're pushing down into Nigeria to hook up with Boko Haram and into Ivory Coast, Ghana, etc. So it's now becoming a hugely serious problem. So how did that happen? Well, after the GSPC, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb was formed. And it was about 200 or so, mainly Algerians running around the desert, taking taking captives of Europeans and gaining their money that way. But not a lot was happening to discourage them. The French were doing a lot, the United States not that much. And then the war with Libya. And the war with Libya resulted in the Tuaregs, who were in Gaddafi's army. That was one way they kept them from leading yet another rebellion, came back to Mali. And when they came back, these Tuaregs who had been in the army of Gaddafi, they wanted independence. You know, Mali already had 3 independence efforts. So they joined with the Islamists, the AQIM, and they took Timbuktu and they took Gao. These are the northern Sahelian cities in Mali. And then they were moving toward Bamako, the capital, and would have taken the whole of Mali had the French not intervened. The French intervened successfully, and with troops from West Africa, principally the troops from Niger, not Nigeria, they defeated AQIM in the Al Hogar Mountains in the Sahara. But a number of the leaders escaped, and we come to the situation today. So the situation today is worse, Sandy.
It looks like it.
So they defeated them, but then unfortunately, the AQIM turned into this. You see this green JENIM. And I'm not going to attempt to give you that name. It's so difficult. And the JNIM is now a combination with, they're led by an Algerian, a man named Kufi, Iman of the Fulani, and Aga Ghali, who led numerous Tuareg rebellions. So now it's become worse because it isn't a bunch of Algerian jihadists who are Arabs running around trying to persuade Moors and Tuaregs to join them, or even sub-Saharan Africans. Suddenly, the situation has become one in which you have local people, not just some from the Tuareg Confederation, but also from the Fulani. So the marginalized groups of pastoralists have become, many of them, jihadists.
So just before asking this question, is that the red dot there, is that the local variant of ISIS, or is it connected to ISIS?
Very good, Sandy. That's ISIS in the greater Sahel.
Okay.
And so about the time that JNIM got themselves organized, ISIS moved into the Sahara and the Sahel, and into Mali and Niger and Burkina Faso in a very big way. And that was about 2017. And they're led by, well, let me see, I think I have a picture of some of these leaders. Okay, so let me scroll back just a minute. This is, let's go back to Al Qaeda, not to get everybody. Al Qaeda was the first one there. It was a group for Salah, fast, and prayer. It became AQIM. The French defeated them, and now it's JNIM. And this is, the man on the right is Amadou Koufu, and he's the Fulani preacher who's one of the leaders. This is Aga Ghali, my old friend, who's the Tuareg leader, I say that jokingly because when I was up in the Sahara, I went to talk to him and I said, you wouldn't be thinking about any more rebellions, would you? Because he's a leader of several rebellions. No, I wouldn't be doing that. And and then this man who's Algerian, and of course, he's the guy who's leading the strategy. And this is Al Ansur. Fortunately, he has been killed. And then this is ISIS. And in some ways, ISIS, well, I don't know who's worse. I mean, ISIS is more outside of Mali, as the first groups were. And this man is Adan Abu Walid Sahrawi. Sahrawi is the name of Spanish Sahara, and which has been trying to secede from Morocco for ages. So he's a complete foreigner. He's leading ISIS. He's probably the most wanted jihadist in that area. And you can just see what's happening. The red dots are, let's try it, Jamaat Nasr al-Islam wal Muslimin, the Al-Qaeda movement that's using Tuaregs, Algerians, and Fulani, and then the blue is ISIS that's trying to hook up with the ISIS part of Boko Haram, the group that captured the young girls. So one of the things that is happening now with these two groups is that Al-Qaeda, the Al-Qaeda group and the ISIS group, one of the good things I might say, are now fighting each other for territory and for control. So of course you're getting even more chaos. But also what's happening is that the initial problem was up north in the Sahara. But since JNIM is essentially Fulani, they've moved down into more the center of the country, and ISIS in the greater Sahel has always been in the center of the country. And what they're doing now is recruiting local youths who don't have jobs, criminal gangs to carry out terrorist attacks on these various villages. But worse than that, the Fulani are inciting violence against the Dogons. Remember that fuzzy picture I showed you, who are the farmers, because the Fulani feel marginalized. The desert is taking away their area, and so they're moving into the Dogon area. The Dogon hunters, who are the kind of the militants, are fighting back against them, and then we end up with I'm going to go back to that, with this tragic situation of communal violence, in which you have the Dogons and the Fulanis fighting each other in Mali, which is so unfortunate, because Mali used to pride itself on all these ethnic groups, other than you might say the Tuaregs and the Moors in the north, getting along with each other. And this is an example of some of this destruction wreaked by Al-Qaeda and by ISIS. This is the Timbuktu airport, and what is amazing is that despite the presence of many armed forces from the West, these groups seem to be continually expanding their control.
So what's being done about all this right now? I know that the French have had some responses. What's the American response been to this instability?
Thank you for that, Sandy. So there it is. There's a pretty good breakdown. MINUSMA is the UN peacekeeping in Mali. It's the most dangerous in the world. Troops of MINUSMA are killed regularly. There are about 13,000 of them. They're mainly in the north because, as you remember, the French defeated AQIM and then put together this peacekeeping effort, mainly with African peacekeeping groups from Niger, Chad, Mauritania, and with some Pakistanis as well. So they're in the north. But as I mentioned, the problem has shifted south and central. And so the French then and the United States have formed new groups. Now, Barkhane is a French counterterrorism group of over 5,000 that's operating in the center. And these guys are actually going after ISIS, as is the G5 Sahelian group, as is this new group, Takuba, of Europeans. I want to mention that the United States is playing a very small role in all this. We have about 4,000 troops on the ground. There, maybe 2,000 are engaged in training African troops, and the other 2,000 are at a drone base we set up in the desert of Niger. Now, the thing about this drone base, it's not taking out jihadists. It's providing information by drones flying over to the French and those various European forces and the UN force as well, as to the location of these various groups. And there's a lot of conversation. Well, maybe we should move this huge UN group south into the center part where JNIM and ISIS are operating. But there's also a lot of resistance to this too, because are they going to be killing Malians, the Fulani and the Tuaregs, principally the Fulani? Because if that happens, then you're getting into a kind of potential civil war scenario. And this is just a picture of the Americans, the British and others with African forces training them so that they can carry on this battle. Because it used to be only the Africans fighting this when I was there, and the Africans were able to defeat the GSPC and Al-Para. But with the intervention of the French and the appearance of ISIS, the French have actually kept boots on the ground, and now the Europeans. Now you may have heard about this debate of President Trump and Secretary General Esper. They want to pull out U.S. troops from the Sahel and the Sahara from these countries, although we're not providing that much assistance. The Niger base is in fact very important for providing the information, and you can't defeat these Islamic groups and Al-Qaeda unless you defeat them militarily. There are a number of attempts to talk to JNIM and try to find a solution with that group. But just to emphasize that it isn't all military, UNICEF's there providing food, there's refugee camps, there's a lot of work also with civil society. And one of the best things about what's going on in the Sahara and Sahel and the G5 is that the West African governments, along with the Middle Eastern governments who are providing funding, are all working together on this. When Mali had its recent coup, it was ECOWAS, the West African government, that insisted that the president not be military. And then there's civil society groups, and this is a group of women from West Africa with Ellen Sirleaf Johnson, who was the president of Liberia. So there are a lot of aid groups, a lot of NGOs. I saw that recently the United States is advertising for people who might be willing to go to Mali to work on food relief. So that, it's sort of like everybody's involved, but the solutions to this seem increasingly difficult given the magnitude of the problem and the fact that actually the military so far has not been able to stop these groups.
So, I mean, looking ahead, does climate change make this region increasingly impossible to live in for all these folks? And looking at governance issues where we have, semi-authoritarian governments all across the Sahel, is democracy or a stronger civil society some of the ways forward?
Yeah, so I'm hoping when we get to the questions, that people will give us their opinion. So what do you do? Look at that. I mean, it's desert. Even if it has 1.5 billion trees, it's a lot of desert. And then just to make it more complicated, the birth rate is extremely high. Now, on the other side of that, population experts say, yes, but life expectancy is only to age 50. Many children die in their first 3 years of life, so it's not that bad. So let's say, okay, birth rate, maybe it can be contended with, but if so, where are all these rapid people who are already there, 20 million in Mali, 20 million in Niger, going to live in this 1/3 of the country? One thing you can say for the West African countries, this excludes Chad, is that they have pretty much free movement through the ECOWAS, the West African Economic Union, but we still have Nigeria right down there, which is going to be the third most populous country in the world by 2035, displacing the United States. So the idea that you have climate change, you have an insurgency combined with jihadist groups, some from Algeria, even Sahrawi, and some local, and you have governments that aren't very free. In this index, not free. Mali just had a coup, and probably the coup leaders are better. The new president, it was a former colonel and secretary of defense, are probably better than the president. The Niger, we say, yeah, semi-free, Chad semi-free, Mauritania semi-free, but they're basically all authoritarian governments and all extremely corrupt. So even when there is riches such as in Niger, which has both yellow cake and oil, it doesn't get to the people in the area. And the United States and France often say, and the United States is saying now that we're not going to give Mali anything other than humanitarian aid until they have elections, which are planned for 18 months from now, which in a way is ridiculous, because having elections in Mali in the midst of an insurgency and battle with jihadists, climate change, etc., is a non-starter. And the last time we insisted on this, we got President Keita, who was extremely corrupt and actually tried to undermine the democracy. So there are just so many problems that one wonders, can Africa dig itself out of this problem? And I'm generally optimistic about Africa, but I don't know. Sandy, you have a good deal of experience in this area. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I'm generally optimistic as well, and yet, there are so many things to be afraid of. And I think, Chad provides such a great example. And I remember it was 20 years ago or so when the World Bank offered Chad a great deal that it would build a pipeline from the oil fields in Chad to the coast at the, I think it was $4 billion in return for Chad's assurance that it would not use that money to buy military supplies. And of course, as soon as the checks cleared and were in the government's account, military supplies were quickly bought. So I guess, one of my fears, and not just for this region, but for many different African countries, is really the destabilizing influence of the international market in securing the resources in these countries. Of course, yellow cake was a very famous resource, in 2003. So I guess my question back to you is, what role do you think the international market and these resources play in not only the instability, which I think is an obvious point, but perhaps in providing some incentives and some structures to create positive change with money flowing into countries that desperately need it to address all of these issues that you've talked about? Is it realistic to expect that foreign corporations, American corporations, guided by, foreign governments, the UN, by the American government, can make a better impact and create a better, trade apparatus that does not, ultimately deepen the pockets of those in power, but can really flow to, civil society groups? And just before I finish that question, I think in my time across Africa, it's the civil society groups that give me the most hope. And honestly, it's the women leading these civil society groups that gives me the most hope of going about things in a different way. So I guess maybe there's two questions within what I just said. One is, what happens with the international apparatus and trade? And secondly, is this century going to be the century of the African woman in rising to address a lot of these challenges that exist?
Well, I start with the second one. I do think Africans in general are very strong, and African women in particular. And I think that, what is hopeful, as you say, is civil society of women more and more leading. But it isn't really easy. For example, Chad still endorses, and it is in law, polygamy, which of course contributes to its fast population rates. And of course, Mali, Niger, Mauritania, they all allow up to 4 wives. So that creates more pressure, and the society believes, and this gets to the corruption issue, that if you become a big man, generally, say you're in government, then you're expected to take care of your extended family, which can extend pretty far. And so that creates additional problems. And so women have to kind of fight their way through that. You're the 4th wife of some minor official, and you're trying to speak out about corruption, about dealing with the various communal violence and the other issues that are going on in the country. As for the foreigners, in a way, it's been beneficial. The French control the yellow cake in Niger. We all remember this. Valerie Plame was with the CIA. Joe, her husband, it was a retired foreign service officer, a foreign ambassador, former ambassador, and he was commissioned by the CIA to go to Niger and see if it was true, as the Bush administration had said, that yellow cake was being sold to Pakistan. And he came back and he said, no, it's not true. Because the French controlled it, okay? And the rest of the story. So, for example, also in Mali, the big foreign companies controlled the diamond production. And in Chad, the Chadians control the oil production, despite the best efforts, as you laid out, of the international community. So sometimes the presence of the international community can be very beneficial in controlling these resources. I remember in Sierra Leone, before the Lebanese got their hands on the diamonds, it was controlled by De Beers. And so the country got the money back from the sale of diamonds. When the Lebanese took over the diamond mining, nobody got anything back except the Lebanese. So there's pro and cons on that. Where the cons come in, I think, is where Russia and China get involved. Russia and China do not have laws about foreign corruption, so they can go off to Africa and their state companies can be corrupt. And China provides huge investment. So of course, Africa wants Chinese investment. And Chinese investment brings with it often corruption, population changes because the workers who come from China then remain in Africa, and greater dependency on Chinese imports. Africa should be trading with itself and manufacturing, textiles and batteries and jams, things that are basic that come out of cotton and fruit and things Africa produces. But China can produce it more cheaper and send it off to Africa, which then cuts down on the possibility of Africa creating its own trading system. So in that way, a long answer to your question, if foreign companies are corrupt, there are some very corrupt European ones who are very much involved in a big Mozambican loan, which made Mozambique the most indebted country in the world. If foreign companies are involved in controlling the resources and providing resources back to the country, it's good. But if they're corrupt, obviously it's not so good.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, just to reiterate, I think those two factors are absolutely crucial for Africa's future, rising empowerment of women, who just bring a totally different perspective and often a highly deliberative one to governance processes in Africa. I don't even need to say in Africa, but in general. And secondly, really just looking at that regulation of how foreign corporations interact. And it's a tough one. It's a pickle because money is needed and foreign corporations obviously bring that money, but it can't just sort of dive in an unregulated fashion or else all kinds of bad outcomes come. I want to ask you one more question before turning over to Q&A. And folks, Q&A window is open, and please do type in your questions. And this kind of builds on what Irene has asked, which is, I remember very well, whether traveling independently or with the government of Canada, that when I would arrive in a small town, it would be chaos and children would be all over me. And this was before cell phones were ever present. And, in one of your photos of folks looking at, a little digital camera and just the sheer delight of that, and I would soon have, 40, 50, 60 kids all gathered around me, curious as to what in the world, who I was and what I was up to. What were your delegations like? You were not only traveling as an American citizen, but as the head representative of the American government. Would you, did you have translators all around you? Were you speaking French or Arabic? Were you, what kind of greeting and reception were you getting when you traveled to some of these, distant places?
Now, it was really interesting because when we were traveling, way up north, and, we were the only embassy that did it. And we were the only embassy other than possibly the French that could afford to do it, quite frankly. We had the 4x4s, you had to have at least 4 cars to pull the other ones out of the sand. We were way up there. When we went up there, people were absolutely delighted. And they were delighted to see the Malian military because it was actually kind of a security presence from, the jihadists from Algeria who were running around up there. And the problem was to keep them from giving you gifts. And I remember one time I got a horse and a goat. And I said, this has got to stop. So I said, I'm giving the horse to the Women's Society. So that kept the horse in the town, and the goat in the town too. So we were very much welcomed uh, in general. Now, I remember very clearly visiting a town very much in the Sahara to the west of Mali, which turned out to be the new home of One Eye, Bel Mokhtar, an Algerian who came into the Sahara, married into the Moor and Berber families, and then started cigarette trade. And eventually he became one of the worst and is still one of the worst. It was his group who blew up in Aminas and killed almost 45 foreigners in southern Algeria. And his group is written in blood, so you get the idea. And we arrived in this town, this desert town, like, in the evening, and there's a big rally. And we think at first, oh, they're all out there waiting for us. Not so. They had been at a rally for our friend Bel Mokhtar. So there was a lot of tension in that town between my group of, local of leaders that included the Malian military and leaders from surrounding towns, and myself and my team, and Bel Mokhtar and his newly extended family.
Well, let me ask you a question that's kind of connected to a lot of this and building on a question in the Q&A from Susan Haynes. I think one of the most difficult things about working in Africa, especially beyond the capital city, is this sort of sense of cultural imperialism, whereby we believe very strongly that, female genital mutilation, for example, is a practice that should not occur. And yet we arrive at that from our own culture and from our own understanding of human rights. How would you deal with or address issues around polygamy, for example, or around female genital mutilation? How do you respect a culture's decision to use these practices when it kind of goes against some of the fundamental fabric of human rights that we hold so near and so dear?
Yeah, I'm pretty strong on this FGM, female genital mutilation, because it is so destructive to the women. And so it's not just a question of difference of society, it's a question of what it does to the children, the women, the girl children, and later the women, because in the worst cases, it completely destroys their whole reproductive system. Now, I was actually faced with that issue myself. So my gardener came to me and he said, can I have some money? Because I have a new baby girl and I want to have her cut. And I said, no. And he said, but I'm going to do it. And I said, well, look, what I will give you money for is to take your daughter to the hospital and have it done there. Because I knew he was going to do it. And if he went to the hospital, it would be done right, it would be done sanitarily, and it wouldn't be so extensive, And he said no. And he just took his daughter and went off up into the to his tribe and had it done. And I fired him. I was so annoyed. I mean, I said, I gave you an opportunity. And you I tried to respect your culture, and you didn't do it. But in Ethiopia, I was friends of this woman who was called Bogi. She actually had degrees from Stanford, Ethiopian, and she worked the way she did it, and she was extremely successful. She was working in southern nations in Ethiopia, and she would work with the town leaders, with the women, with women who were doing the female genital mutilation to find, like midwife jobs for them, and with the girls themselves. And she would get buy-in from all these groups to include the local authorities. And she would educate them And then when they had bought in, she would have a big celebration. And I went to one of her big celebrations, and everybody's there, every interest group in the village and surrounding villages, and they're dancing and singing, and they're celebrating the fact that they're no longer doing this. So this way, the village has completely bought into it. The economic advantage for the people who were doing the cutting has they've given them another kind of job, and people are realizing, this is not what we want to do, and that has been very successful. But it doesn't really work unless the people of the community have bought into it, and that's your cultural thing.
Right. Well, it's a tricky one, you know. You can't just walk in and say, this practice is barbaric, you must stop, because that's just not culturally appropriate or sensitive. And yet, you know, on some of these issues, it's a tough one to turn a shoulder to. Let's push this conversation out a little bit to talk about family planning in more general. You know, when we have birth rates that are so sky high in areas that are incredibly unstable and have, you know, increasing effects of climate change and all that means for securing water and food, you know, what's happening in terms of, you know, UN groups or other groups discussing family planning? Is that something that you see as being a major force in the region?
It can be, although I remember I had Ambassador Pam White on.
That's right.
Remember, she told us about handing out all these condoms,
That's
and
right.
at the end, the local leader came up to her and he said, "You know, we never use those condoms." And that, you know, that can be very much the case. I mean, in some countries like Uganda with Museveni, he very much is against any kind of population control, and Uganda's pretty small, and he wants it to grow. You know, sometimes it comes back to this. You know, both Muslims and Catholics don't believe in birth control because you know, they want their membership to grow,
Right.
and so you're up against you know, religious beliefs, and that makes it very difficult. Usually, the population growth rate begins to go down as the country becomes more successful, more urbanized, and wealth increases. That hasn't happened to the extent that the World Bank and the United Nations thought in Africa. And that's one reason why you have this huge population growth that's going to make Africa by 2050 the most populous continent of continents in the world. But it is coming down slowly. I mean, if you look at all the trend lines of the different continents and areas of the world, Africa's is coming down to meet the others. It's just that it's still pretty high.
Right. And yet I wonder too, if in the big cities, I'm thinking of, this is not in the Sahel, but Nairobi, for example, where women are very much a part of economic life and have a very different role than they do in a lot of West African countries, that the birth rate is most likely much lower. And perhaps, you know, that issue, again, of women's empowerment will in itself help to resolve some of these, you know, proliferating birth rates. Let's go back and talk about terrorism a little bit more. Obviously, the Sahel, much like most of Africa, much like most of the world for that matter, is an area that's been marked by tribal discord and warfare for centuries, if not millennia. Is the rise of these various terrorist groups just a kind of armed continuation of that pattern, do you think, or are we seeing something different and new?
I think we're seeing something different, although I think that's a really great question. Is that your question or is that from one of our audience?
That was building on a question from the audience.
Yeah, it's because it's a great question. Because like the Tuaregs told the French when they gave Mali and Senegal together independence, and then Mali broke away, which was a big mistake, Mali, that took away its coastline, that they didn't want to be part. that they were Moors and Tuaregs and Semitic, and they wanted to be independent. Of course, it's not viable, the region that the Tuaregs are in. And, it's part of lots of other countries. But it did lead to 4 rebellions. And then when you have the Algerian jihadists come in the area, they initially supported them and were part of the overtaking Timbuktu. And so to draw on this idea, you could say that, well, first, let me go a step back. But still, the majority were all foreigners, Algerians, when it was AQIM and when the French and the Nigerians defeated them. And what I'm trying to say is, yes, there are local battles like the Tuaregs battling the sub-Saharan Africans, or if you have Sudan, the same situation. But it's when you get the foreigners involved, like the Algerians who are North Africans, and that's what in a way makes this situation serious now with JNIM, because they've recruited so many Fulani, and that's why it's turned into also communal violence. So that might say, yes, that's kind of something that might have always been there and broken out. But where you get the really serious issue is ISIS in the greater Sahel, because that's foreign. And these foreigners are essentially preying on the poverty and corruption and bad governance of the area in order to eventually suck up the resources and continue to expand. Because with jihadists, you have to continue to expand. And so the jihadist movements in Africa, I think, are extremely dangerous and extremely hard to defeat. We have been fighting or helping to fight, training Somali forces against Al-Shabaab, but also the Kenyans, the Ethiopians, the Ugandans, the Burundians. I mean, it's not like the Africans don't understand it's a huge problem and aren't fighting against it. They're all fighting against Al-Shabaab in Somalia, but they haven't won. And now you have another outbreak, which is indigenous and jihadist in the north of Mozambique, a very poor place, but also the region in the world with the most natural gas. Huh. And so what these jihadist groups do is exploit existing ethnic tensions and poverty and poor governance.
And is it ultimately to create, as in Syria and Iraq, a sovereign nation, or is it just about, sucking up as much money and influence as possible?
Well, it's interesting because, that's apparently one of the, and I say this with a bit of hesitation, between Al-Qaeda and ISIS. ISIS believes in caliphates, like we saw across Iraq, Iran, Syria, whereas, and so presumably that's what they have in mind, is a caliphate in southern Mali, Burkina Faso, dropping down into northern Nigeria. Al-Qaeda doesn't see it as caliphates. They see it as, gaining resources and from the territories that they control. And I guess that's one of the encouraging things, that they're now fighting each other.
A question from Herb Thomas, which is something I was wondering as well. So northern Nigeria seems as much a part of the Sahel as any of the other countries that are officially Sahelian. Do the official Sahelian governments regard Nigeria as a potential partner or as a potential threat?
Yeah, no, Nigeria is the leader of the economic community of West Africa, because obviously it's the most populous and most powerful country in the region. So Nigeria is a big leader Good Luck Johnson, who wasn't one of their stellar presidents, but still was a former president of Nigeria, has been very much involved in trying to resolve the Malian coup, which basically is resolved. We now have a civilian president and a military colonel who's vice president, except for the United States, who thinks they have to wait till there's democracy as usual. Which is interesting for the Trump administration because generally it's not interested in this issue. But I think the Biden administration will be the same on this, quite honestly, because democracy and human rights rightly figure very highly. But I just keep saying, you have to leaven this a little bit because, the last president was extremely corrupt and was not Democratic. But I just lost my train of thought, Sandy. We must be getting to the end.
We are, but you just triggered something that I had wanted to ask about earlier too, which was, of course, we had the deaths, I think it was of 4 soldiers, US soldiers in Niger, and how that drew, American attention to, well, why are we in Niger and what are the goals that we want to achieve in Niger? And I guess let's flash forward with this. We know that the Trump administration has had a unfortunate reaction to all of that. What would a Biden administration do, in your opinion, around, a U.S. base in Niger, deaths in Niger of American soldiers or beyond in the Sahel, and how might that galvanize or change American opinion or policy in the region?
So the Biden administration believes in a partnership with Africa and not dictating to Africa. So where they're very different from the Trump administration is the Trump administration is almost wholly focused on China, seeing Africa as a competition area between the United States and China. And that sort of came out of John Bolton when he was the National Security Advisor. And also some of Trump's rhetoric, such as shithole countries, has kind of turned off the Africans, and it's very, very unfortunate because Africa has generally been a bipartisan policy. The major difference between the Republicans and Democrats being over birth control, and generally the Republicans will not provide funding to assistance UN NGOs who engage in birth control
or provide abortion services,
or
like
provide abortion or sterilization or anything like that. And the Democrats generally are willing to provide birth control and things like that, and train midwives, which is really important. So you'll see right away, even in bipartisan policy, there will be that change, I think, with Biden. But I think the other thing is, in addition to a partnership, we'll see once again a real emphasis on democracy and human rights in Africa. And it's sort of by default. We have a special envoy for the Sahel right now, Peter Pam, who's actually a very competent guy, who's pushing on the democracy side. And so as much as I would like to say, oh, the Biden administration will, provide more assistance for development projects, which are badly needed across the Sahel and Mali, I'm not so sure they will because of the coup.
Let's talk about Sudan for just a second. This is a question from Mike and Ellen. What happens in taking Sudan off the terrorist list? I'm assuming that's the global terrorist list. And with China having an active role, does it really matter if a country is on or off the terrorist list?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. So this is Sudan, which is, now that it's split into 2 countries, and South Sudan is one country and Sudan is the other. And that was Omar Bashir's country, and they've had revolution, and now they have new people in government who are hopefully going to be democratic, and it's hopeful. And the Secretary of State Pompeo went to Sudan and basically and this might be a little jaded, but I think that's pretty much what we saw, because I happen to know that nobody from the Africa Bureau was with Pompeo. And he basically made this deal with the government. You recognize Israel and Jerusalem as the capital, and in return, we'll take you off the U.S. list. That was the U.S. list of terrorist countries. And it's good to get off, because if you're on it, you can't get from anything from arms to computers that will block sales of. And so they said, okay, that's a deal we can live with, and they did it.
May we please have a government that involves its experts? We can't wing it with these countries. We can't go in and just strike a deal and make everything better again. These are highly complex societies with highly complex problems. And, it just reminds me again and again of, we need our best and brightest to be helping our secretaries, for example, make the right decisions. And that just reminded me too.
It's being used, like transactional. It's just being used as a pawn.
Yeah, right. I got to spend a bunch of time in Khartoum. I'm not sure I've been to a more fascinating city. I got to see some incredible Sufi ceremonies there, and the marketplaces there were miles and miles long. It was truly like going to visit another universe. So let me ask you one last question, Vicki. When you think of the Sahel, when you think of Mali, what gives you some hope for the future? What gives you some optimism?
Well, obviously, first of all, the people, because you have to look at the people and say, they want better lives, they want better governments. They're trying their best to move forward. I also am encouraged because in West Africa, it's always the region. And when the region works together, it's much, much stronger, especially when Algeria is willing to work with them, because it's always been the peacekeeper for Mali and for the whole region. But Algeria is also skittish about intervening. And I also like to see the fact that the Middle East is providing assistance too. So I like the cooperation I'm seeing. I like the fact that the United Nations is there, and that they understand that, moving more into the center where the GNIM is operating is difficult and has to be thought through. I'm glad that the French and the Europeans and the United States know we're unwilling to provide boots on the ground, are actually willing to fight these jihadists in Africa, ISIS in particular. Nigeria could be a huge powerhouse with all those people, and they're smart, entrepreneurial. So, if they can get their arms around this terrorist come insurgency, then they can concentrate on some of these really difficult development issues. But I think it's going to be difficult. I mean, I'm really optimistic for West Africa, those coastal countries, and we really want to keep the jihadists out of those countries because they've been doing very well. They've had record growth and economic growth, and it really was, West Africa was beginning to outstrip East Africa in growth, and we want to see this continue. We want to see Africa come into its own, and a big problem for doing this is the terrorism, and the United States definitely needs to be a part of the solution.
I couldn't agree more. Whenever a time machine is invented, one of the things I hope to go back and help do is redraw those boundaries, those borders in West Africa. These are vertically split countries when it should be horizontally split. And I love whoever wrote that borders are the scars of the past. And in West Africa, I feel like that scar is, as big and bright as really any I can think of across the world.
Yeah, I comment on that is, I think the solution for northern Mali and for the Tuaregs, who you saw are in a bunch of countries, is, essentially give them autonomy. So, okay, have your own government, have your own police or military, say police is probably more acceptable because, they live without borders. They can't exist with borders. They're just traders. And so they're moving across the borders all the time. So, we have to recognize, as you said, in regard to cutting and female genital mutilation. I have to recognize these cultural differences and provide solutions that actually fit these ethnic groups.
Well, Vicki, thank you yet again. I'm curious, I'm going to go back and count up how many talks you offered for us on the very biggest stages to this one. And you're just such a treasure of information and treasure of a human being. So thank you very much, Vicki.
You're very kind, Sandy. And this has been a lot of fun because we could talk with you and hear about your experiences. That's been wonderful.
For sure. Well, you have a fine day and goodbye to everybody, and we will see you soon.
Thank you.